Graduation day was supposed to feel like proof that all the pressure, the late nights, and the quiet sacrifices had finally meant something. I stood there in a stiff gown that didn't quite feel like mine, surrounded by families holding flowers and phones, watching parents cry with pride. I kept glancing at my own phone, even though I already knew what it would show. I had sent the reminders weeks ago. The date, the time, the seat section. I made it easy. Still, as the ceremony began, my screen stayed empty. I told myself not to think about it. I focused on the stage, the lights, the echo of names being called. Each announcement came with cheers and whistles, and every time the sound faded, the silence around me felt heavier. I imagined them running late, stuck in traffic, walking in at the last minute. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a delay. It was a choice. When my name was finally called, I stood up and walked forward alone. I smiled the way you're supposed to, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. For a brief moment, pride pushed through the disappointment. I had done this. I had made it. But when I stepped off the stage and looked into the crowd, there was no familiar face looking back. No camera raised just for me. No one waiting. Afterward, I drifted out with everyone else, pretending I had somewhere to be. That night, I posted a single photo. Not for attention, but to mark the moment for myself. The comments from strangers came quickly, full of congratulations and emojis. From my parents, there was nothing, no message, no explanation. Days passed, then weeks, and the silence hardened into something I learned to live with. I told myself it didn't matter. I buried the hurt under routine and responsibility, convincing myself that independence meant not needing recognition. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. Their number. For a split second, I thought this was it. An apology, a delayed acknowledgement. Instead, the conversation went straight to money. $2,100. No mention of graduation. No congratulations. Just a request, spoken like an expectation. I sat there holding the phone, feeling the weight of everything crash together. They missed the most important day of my life without a word, yet remembered me the moment they needed something. In that moment, something shifted. I realized this wasn't just about absence anymore. It was about boundaries. And for the first time, I knew I wasn't going to let this pass quietly. I didn't answer right away. After the call ended, I sat in silence, replaying it over and over, trying to understand how something so casual could feel so deeply insulting. The more I thought about it, the more memories surfaced, lining up neatly like proof I had ignored for years. I realized this wasn't a single moment of disrespect. It was a pattern I had been trained to accept. I started noticing how my achievements had always been treated like background noise. Good grades were expected, not celebrated. Milestones were acknowledged only when they were convenient. But whenever help was needed, whenever money or time or effort was required, I was suddenly important. Graduation hadn't changed that dynamic. It had only exposed it. The amount they asked for wasn't random. $2,100. Specific. Urgent. Framed as something I owed, not something I could choose to give. They talked as if my life had just entered a phase where my role was to provide, not to be supported. There was no question of whether I was comfortable, no curiosity about how I was doing after finishing school. Just an assumption that I would comply, like I always had. For the first time, I paused instead of explaining myself. I didn't justify my feelings or soften the truth. I simply said no, calmly, clearly, not because I couldn't help, but because I finally understood that helping would only reinforce the idea that my presence was optional, but my resources were not. Saying no felt strange, almost wrong, like I was breaking an unspoken rule. But it also felt honest. The reaction came faster than I expected. What started as disappointment quickly turned into blame. Suddenly, I was selfish, ungrateful, disrespectful. The same people who hadn't shown up for me were now rewriting the story, casting themselves as victims and me as the problem. Every message carried an edge, designed to make me feel small and guilty, as if my boundaries were a personal attack. I stayed quiet and watched how quickly the tone shifted. There was no attempt to understand my perspective, no acknowledgement of the hurt they had caused. Instead, the pressure increased. They brought up sacrifices, obligations, and family loyalty, stacking them like weights meant to crush my resolve. I realized then that this wasn't a conversation. It was a test, and they expected me to fail. When I heard that they had contacted the police, the fear hit hard. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because it showed how far they were willing to go to regain control. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were trying to intimidate me into compliance. The absurdity of it all was almost unreal. A graduation ignored. A boundary set. A punishment threatened. As the initial shock faded, something else took its place. Clarity. I understood that this was no longer about money or misunderstanding. It was about power, about whether I would continue to let them define my worth by what I could give. Sitting alone, I realized how much energy I had spent trying to earn approval that was never freely offered. Instead of panicking, I got organized. I gathered messages, timelines, and records. I grounded myself in facts, not emotions. For the first time, I wasn't preparing to apologize or give in. I was preparing to stand firm. I stopped reacting and started thinking about what protecting myself actually looked like. That was the real turning point. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be controlled by guilt, fear, or obligation again. If they wanted consequences, I was finally ready to let the truth speak for itself. When the police finally showed up, the moment I had feared felt strangely calm. There were no accusations that held weight, no proof of any wrongdoing, no obligation for me to explain my boundaries. Once the facts were laid out, it was clear there was nothing to pursue. The visit ended quickly, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence that said more than any argument ever could. After that, everything changed. The messages stopped. The urgency disappeared. The same people who had demanded control suddenly had nothing to say. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like distance I had chosen. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for approval or bracing for the next demand. I was breathing freely. I realized that graduation wasn't just the end of my education. It was the moment I learned how to stand on my own without seeking validation from people who only noticed me when they needed something. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get acknowledgement, but I gained clarity, and that mattered more. I stopped offering access to my life as a substitute for love. I stopped explaining my worth to people committed to misunderstanding it. The boundary I set that day became a line I refused to erase, no matter how uncomfortable it made them. And with every day that passed, the guilt they had taught me to feel lost its grip. Some families celebrate milestones. Others test how much you're willing to tolerate. Walking away from that cycle didn't make me heartless. It made me whole. I learned that respect is shown through presence, not pressure, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say no, stand firm, and let silence reveal the truth.